Hi, I'm Matt, I'm a story writer and world builder, and I like video games. What I don't like as much is when video games are so stupid, suspension of disbelief is not an option anymore. And that's why I love Valheim. It gets so many things right, and all the gameplay mechanics feel impactful and rewarding. However, if you've seen my last two videos in this series, you already know that the Viking Age is somewhat misrepresented in this game. And in most other games too, to be fair. Looking at you, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where's all the good research like in previous games? I thought Ubisoft was proud of being true to history.
We worked with a historian from the beginning. We had a historian get us all of our reference material. He went into libraries where he had access that we didn't have access and got us the actual plans of the cities, huge database of images, and then we had two other historians on board later in the process. They reviewed the script for accuracy. They also reviewed the art direction, videos of in-game, and it's been really cool to get their feedback.
Oh well, I guess this level of dedication is not an option anymore if you poop out a game every year. Anyway, Valheim. I talked about how swords and axes are not historically accurate, but also not bad, and I talked about how the shields in the game are not only inaccurate, but also just unrealistic, which mildly annoys me. Enough so that it got me ranting for a while. So if you haven't seen those videos, make sure to check them out, but you don't need them to understand this one, so feel free to do it afterwards. What I found in these videos so far is that research on the Viking culture in this game is kind of lacking. In my opinion, if you choose a culture to represent in your game, you should do it properly and do some research. Because people are gonna play it, and people who don't know anything about the culture will believe everything you say. Today I want to touch on the weapons I haven't talked about so far, mainly because a lot of them are a little further down fantasy lane. I'm also gonna talk about spears today, one of my favorite weapons, and since that's gonna be an absolute rant, I'm gonna save it for last. And as always, this video will be approved by renowned researcher and medieval combat expert Roland Warzecha, and I also got help from Skallagrim for this video towards the end, so stay tuned. So to start, let's have a look at some of the most popular weapons in the game, hammers and maces. While a lot of people, myself included, are sword lovers, the meta in Valheim is dominated by hard-hitting chunks of metal, namely Frostner and Porcupine. Now, first of all, in real life, spears, bows, and sword and shield dominated the Bronze Age and Viking Age battlefield. So this is inaccurate, but never mind that, because both are fantasy weapons anyway, so are they at least plausible? Well, long story short, both are impossible to wield because they suffer from video game weapon syndrome. They are way too big. Or are they? To answer this question, I want to dive a little deeper into what maces and hammers they actually used at the time. None. But Matt, you will say, even Thor has a hammer, and I'll get to that in a second. But let's look at the actual people and what we know from archaeology first. Maces would have been the exception, and apart from that, the iron mace doesn't really have any flaws to talk about anyway. There have been maces like that, so in terms of realism, this is perfectly fine. So let's have a look at the bronze mace. Just like the iron one, this is a so-called flanged mace. But a mace back then would look more like this, a replica from Todd's workshop. Todd Cuttler makes weapons based on historical examples, and look how tiny it is. It's not more than a glorified cane. And why have more than that? This is definitely enough to knock someone out. Flanged maces came in later and were designed to destroy armor, and people in the Bronze Age just didn't have much armor. In the context of the game, it's okay to make it like this though, because bronze and iron weapons and armor all exist alongside each other. So to recap, maces shouldn't be in the game, but they are. And the way they are is not historically accurate, but certainly plausible in the context of the game. But what about hammers? While warhammers certainly existed, they looked like this. Not this. Yes? No. Right? Wrong. Let's touch on this really quick so we can get rid of it. This is the iron sledge. It's a sledgehammer. A sledgehammer is a solid piece of steel, right? Do you have any idea how heavy this would be? Let's do the calculations for this one real quick. It's about as big and wide as my head, maybe 15 to 20 centimeters. For argument's sake, let's use the smaller 15 centimeters or about 6 inches. So 15 times 15 times what looks like 30 to 40. Again, let's use the smaller number just to really hammer it home. I'll see myself out. Times the density of steel, and we get a whopping 50 kilos or 115 pounds. That's like lifting a small woman at the end of a stick, mind you, which is multiple times as hard. Or waving around a whole toilet or a punching bag on a stick. There is no way you could use this like you do in the game, because try lifting over 100 pounds like this.
Robert Oberst was one of the top 10 finishers in the World's Strongest Man last year.
And if you try to fight with it like you would with a real Warhammer, there are two even bigger problems, and both are gravity. Firstly, even if you were able to hold it out straight, it might just tip you over.
Don't hurt yourself. Also, it's just...
And second, because for every action there's a reaction, if you try to swing this, it would swing you right back.
Okay.
So yeah, screw this. This hammer goes right out the window. Except it doesn't, because I can't throw it. So this hammer stays right here where it is, and I'm gonna ignore it. But Matt, I hear you say, why does this not apply to the Frostner then? We're getting there by looking at two other weapons first. So say hello to my little friend. This is Porcupine. And no, I didn't name it that, it's the actual name of the weapon in the game. Of course, a weapon like this has never existed, but spiked clubs certainly have. So let's talk about it a little. Again, this one is way too thick, about as thick as my head. I'll spare you the maths this time, but if it has a radius of about 10 centimeters, it comes at a hefty 35-ish kilos or 70 something pounds, which is obviously way too heavy again. But this time there's a way to make this work, because we could make it hollow. Technically, the other one could be hollow too, but the game says it's a sledgehammer and those aren't hollow. Normally a mace isn't hollow either, because it would probably deform. But here we are actually hitting with the spikes first, so those absorb most of the impact, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Unfortunately, it seems like the spikes are fixed inside the bowl somehow, and this would be unreasonably difficult to make. You could make a mold and make it from cast iron, but cast iron is brittle, so you would probably have to make two half bowls by hammering two steel plates in shape, drill holes for the spikes, have needles be affixed to the shaft in a stable fashion, and then weld the two halves together around it somehow. It would be very difficult. And keep in mind that they couldn't simply pluck a Makita and drill holes. Drilling holes was hard work, and they probably would have punched holes instead, which does really make it easier. Like I said, way too much effort to make what is effectively a spike club. If this was realistic, it should look something like this. Alright, let's apply what we have learned to Frostner. We could make it hollow, but it would be a lot of work. But this time, if we would hit the target, or worse, not hit the target, but something hard like a rock, because a square has less structural integrity than a sphere, my guess is that Frostner would deform or pop open at the seams all the time. And you can't fix it if you have a dent in it, because you can't get to the inside. It would look like crap in no time. And that's where our last hammer comes in, Stack Breaker. Let's ignore the fact that the antlers affixed to the hammerhead are probably gonna come off with the first hit or even break. In fact, let's just pretend they weren't there and we had just the wooden parts. Then this would be called a mallet, and it's made for smashing things really hard. Historically speaking, mallets weren't used in combat, because they are still too unwieldy. Any trained fighter would dodge it, or at least kill you by the time you swung that thing. Again, warhammers looked something like this, but at least it's possible to lift this thing. So finally, let's talk about Frostner. There are two ways I can see Frostner at least not be impossible to wield. One is to just make it a steel-plated mallet. Yes, steel, not silver. I talked about why it can't be silver at length in my video about swords and axes. The short version is, silver is too soft to make a weapon out of it. But we could have silver inlays just for the looks. Option 2 is probably what the devs had in mind with Frostner. It's a weapon similar to Thor's hammer Mjolnir. It's just magic, and it can be wielded by those who are worthy. After all, we used the Emir's flesh and Ice Drake freeze glands in making this hammer somehow, so wait. Ew, that's what's inside it? It's a flesh maul? Ugh, that even sounds disgusting. Now that I think about it, we also use Emir's flesh for the Iron Sledge, so that one might be the same disgusting construct. Okay, I give up. These are too weird with all their flesh and magic and whatnot. But at the end of the day, meat is heavy too. None of the hammers are usable, and neither the maces nor the hammers are historically accurate, because they simply were not present in Scandinavia. And the only mace that looks like a historical example from somewhere else is the Iron Mace. Oof. Let's move on. I'm kinda itchy to talk about spears, but I said I would save them for last, so here comes bows. The first one, the crude bow, is literally a string on a stick. Now that's crude. It looks very unfinished. The draw weight would be all over the place because the arms are different thicknesses and there's this stub of a twig, I guess. I doubt that thing would shoot straight, but apart from that, simple bows have been made for 10,000s of years. We have evidence of bows from 50,000 years ago. I found this guy on the internet who literally went into the rainforest for 6 months straight and he just improvised a bow from bamboo. Mad respect. So yeah, this bow is depicted a little too crude, but apart from that we can totally have a really simple bow in the game that just does the job. Next we have the fine wood bow. This is a recurve bow, which means it's essentially bent away from the user in a C shape, and when you string it you bend it backwards, which creates a lot of tension and makes it very powerful. So that's all well and good. But there's no evidence for these in Scandinavia. They were used in many other parts of the world. For example, the Mongols were famous for their skill and prowess with the recurve bow, even shooting from horseback. So technically it could be an import, but since we are crafting the weapons ourselves, it's rather unlikely that we would have learned to craft this kind of bow in our lifetime. If the devs had done a little research, and I mean like literally 5 minutes because it didn't take me more than that to find this, they could have found a way better option. There are Viking sagas mentioning horn bows. What a missed opportunity. We could craft it from wood and skeleton bones, for example, because let's be honest, there's not enough use for the skeleton bones in the game. Then we have this abomination, which is labeled Huntsman bow, and it's yet another missed opportunity. First of all, the way it is bent is way too exaggerated. Not only is there no need for that, but I also doubt this would accelerate the arrow in a meaningful way. Maybe it would even snap when drawn. My guess is that graphics guy misinterpreted a recurve bow, and that's where this shape comes from. Then we use iron for this bow, which manifests in these iron rings that frankly do nothing except for adding weight, when again, with 5 minutes worth of research, they could have found that there were complete steel bows in India, for example, would have made more sense than this, even if they were not present in Scandinavia. The feathers are nice though. And lastly we have the Draugr bow. No, just no. Looks cool though. I mean, it is a proper recurve bow, but all these adornments were never done and I have no idea how or if this would impact performance. At the very least you could use the long spikes for aiming and stability, so I guess that's fine. It's a thing in archery today at least. Okay, is it spear time yet? Is it spear o'clock? Almost. One more weapon. The knife. Knives are one of the oldest weapons of mankind. They are useful tools, cutlery, and a weapon all at once. In Viking and medieval times, almost everyone would carry a knife on their person at all times. They could even serve as a status symbol. You could basically show off by having a very elaborate knife. Nevertheless, they were tools for daily use. So, good decision to have it in the game. There's just one thing that, again, I can only attribute to a lack of research. Why did the devs not include the sax? The sax is a long knife, or short sword almost in some cases, and was used as an all-purpose tool, like a big Bowie knife or a machete. It was surely used for fighting too if you had nothing else on you. The sax is often closely associated with Vikings, so it baffles me that they missed it. In reality, it wasn't just a Viking thing, but it had been around for hundreds of years before the Viking Age, and all over Northern Europe. It was a handy and useful travel companion that could save your life when things got rough, like if someone tried to rob you. Funnily enough, there's no steel or iron knife in the game, so it even has a perfect place in the game. But instead we got the shitty knife. Ugh. That thing has no business being so strong in the game. Bone weapons and such cannot retain an edge as well as a bronze or iron weapon. I guess it's supposed to do so much damage because it would rip you to shreds with an edge like this, but a steel weapon in that shape would still be better. And don't even get me started on green banana. So, finally, it's time to talk about the glorious spear. I love spears. If I was a soldier in medieval times, the spear would be my weapon of choice, together with a backup weapon for close quarters. Spears have been dominating the battlefield for thousands of years. Our ancestors, the ancestors of the human race, they already knew how to use spears. It was one of the first weapons ever, aside from the almighty stick and the good old rock. I imagine that as soon as people learned about sharpening things, there were spears all around. They are amazing for stabbing and they can be thrown like nothing nothing else. I have heard claims from the archaeologist community that being able to throw things was a large part of humanity's success. And sure enough, if you look at other primates and apes, they suck at throwing. It's our physique that enables us to throw things with a lot of power, and it makes spears a most lethal weapon. Without throwing sharp stuff, there would have been a variety of animals that we couldn't have killed, or worse, that could have killed us. And before bows and arrows came in, it was the only effective long-range piercing weapon we had available. In fact, one could argue that the bow is just a means to shoot tiny spears. And then you have the factor of availability, because what do you need to make a spear? A long stick and some sharp rock or whatever tool available to make a pointy end. And spears are so versatile. You can use them for warfare, hunting, fishing, as a tool, as a walking stick. If it has an edge, you can use it as a knife. Everything. Spears are the way to go. I love spears and I want to use a spear in the game. But the way they are represented in the game, even just from a gameplay perspective, they are garbage. And I'm not even talking about throwing them. Yes, throwing them, it's a bit hard to aim because your character doesn't consider gravity, but that's a gameplay decision and we have to respect that. It just means that you have to get good. And I like that. I'm talking about the way we hold the spear. We are just carrying it with us. There's no battle-ready stance whatsoever. To use it, we literally have to lift it up and stab every time. This makes it so stupid, annoying, awkward and slow to fight with. I mean, technically you can keep stabbing, but you can't move around for some reason. With every other weapon you take steps in between swings, so you can effectively extend your range, but with the spear you're completely static, which makes it awful to use. And for some reason, even though it's over 6 foot long approximately, you have no range. Ugh, it drives me crazy. And where's my quick underhand stab? You could just poke away with the spear like Skull does in this clip. It's supposed to be a very nimble weapon. So, before we look at the spears themselves, let's fix the gameplay first. And it's so easy, we actually have two options. Option 1. The spears in the game are pretty long, about 2 meters or 6.5 feet I'd say. There have been much longer spears throughout history, but I'd say this length is enough to make a spear a little unwieldy. So the easiest option would be to have them be a two-handed weapon and give them the basic moveset of the Adker, with a great variety of stabs and lots of range. The secondary attack can still be throwing it, and defense can still be what the Viking, are you telling me this is your idea of blocking with the spear? No wonder you died on the battlefield. You shouldn't ever block like this, for a number of reasons. First, your hands might get cut. Second, if your opponent swings like a madman, like you do, he might cleave through it and cut you. A well-made spear won't break the first time, but if you always block like that, at some point it surely will. And third, a powerful swing might just come through anyway, without even breaking the spear, and still hurt you. Not to mention that there's no way to deflect the thrust in this position. And it's just a pole. You don't need to be a trained swordsman to cut around this. Your defense should be holding the spear out in front of you, deflecting incoming blows. Basically, it's the same as your offense. Of course, always defending would break the game, so maybe alter it slightly visually so the player can see whether or not the character is actively defending. But wait. Here's option number 2 on how to fix the spear. The way they are now, the spear is a one-handed weapon, so let's keep it that way and give them a whole new moveset. Your normal stance is just holding the spear horizontally with your arm down, so you can go for easy and quick underhand stabs with good range and low damage. Maybe there could be a little combo where every stab goes a little further and does more damage, like with the Adker. Since you can't throw the spear like this, the secondary attack changes into a high guard. Now your standard attack becomes a more powerful and aggressive short-range attack. If you hold down the button, you wind up for a throw that travels further and quicker the longer you hold it. Within reason, of course. But at the end, it could look something like this. So that's how to make the spears more fun and more realistic at the same time. I have more ideas on how to make the fighting more realistic and sophisticated, but I'm probably not gonna make a video on that because it's nothing I criticize, just my ideas. So if you're interested, let me know in the comments and I will make that video. Alright, that was the gameplay part. But what about the spears themselves? Are they historically accurate? Well, not really. I guess the flint spear is fine, although it's missing something to affix the tip to the shaft. And the bronze spear and the ancient spear both have 2 wings on either side, which serves no purpose. Winged spears did exist, and they are my favorite kind of spears. The wings help you deflecting incoming blows and stop the enemy, or a wild animal charging you, from impaling themselves further on the spear, closing the distance and hitting you anyway. So the first pair of wings is good. the second is useless. But still, the spears are manageable, and I also don't mind this little twig that's wrapped around the ancient spear too much, even though it might get in the way if you do something fancy. But what straight up makes me angry is the fanged spear. Look at it. How are you supposed to stab with it if the tip is not facing forward? Did no one think about this? Fighting with this would be so awkward. Oh wait, fighting with this is awkward. Well, even more so then. I highly doubt you could make this work in any effective way. Alright, that was the spears. It's a shame that the spears are no fun, but I'm a modest man, so I'll just take something else instead. The Adker. I love this thing. Great reach, quick solid damage, and a completely ridiculous AoE attack that staggers everything. I don't think I need to talk about how this is not historically accurate, and no one did this in any fight ever. If someone did, he's probably dead. Now, I know quite a bit about Vikings and weapons and stuff, so when I played the game for the first time, I was baffled not to find the very common sax, but to find the Adker, a weapon I had never heard of, and to be honest, I still know nothing about it. So I brought a special guest to talk for me.
Some words about the Adker. So this is a type of weapon that's mentioned in the Icelandic sagas, mainly in the 13th century and later. I found an article in the Acta Periodica Duellatorum, volume 7, issue 1, which is exactly about this topic. So apparently the word Adker, when you pick it apart, has no direct meaning. In Old Icelandic, it seems to have a Germanic root. The Icelandic word for spear, spjot, is noticeably different. And when you look at the way the Adker is described, it's not actually described in terms of looks. Presumably because people knew what it looked like, so it didn't need any explanation, even though it was apparently a rare weapon overall. The way it's generally described, it sounds like a long, relatively heavy weapon used mainly for thrusting, but also for cutting occasionally. So that would mean most likely a heavier spear and one that you can more easily strike with without risking to damage it. So I guess in a way it's a bit disappointing to go through the article only to realize that, oh, so it was just a spear after all, just a different type or different construction basically. But yeah, that seems most likely to me as well, because sometimes it's translated as halberd, but that just doesn't make any sense because actual halberds appeared much later in history. Something similar to a glaive perhaps would make sense, and it has been interpreted as such, but nothing has been found from the time that looks really anything like a glaive, let alone a halberd. We do, however, have long hewing spears, so it just makes the most sense that it would be that.
So, do these descriptions fit the Valheim Adker? Well, not really, because it's written that it's a thrusting weapon you would occasionally cut with. And the Adker, while used as a stabbing weapon in the game, doesn't really look like it's meant for stabbing. The tip is curved upwards, which makes stabbing a lot harder, and it's off-center too. Although, like Skall has said, we have never found any weapon that fits the description other than a normal hewing spear. And I don't think we need to talk about the black metal Adker at all. This is a halberd, and Vikings had different words for that, and also its shape is way too complicated. You could have made that thing a lot simpler, but of course it looks cool again, and that's why they made it. Alright, so that's it. That's pretty much all the weapons in the game so far. So there you go. I hope you had fun, I certainly did. Leave a like if you learned something. If you have anything to say about the video, please put it in the comments. Every comment and like helps with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like my content and you want to see me again, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you get notified when a new video comes out. Thanks again to Skallagrim for allowing me to use part of his video. If you want to see the whole video, links in the description. And last but not least, a huge thank you goes out to Roland Warzecha. I got way more help than I asked for, and I'm so grateful for it. Not only did he provide me with so much material and resources, he also reviewed all the footage and spent so much of his free time on this. So please do check out his channel too and look at his amazing stuff. And if you're into Viking culture, European medieval culture, sword fighting, all that stuff, you will not be disappointed. So please go check out his channel. Lastly, you can follow me on Instagram. And with that, there's nothing left for me to say except stay safe, have a great time, Muffin out.